Yeah, sorry. Like usually I set up in the other room, but I'm still uploading. I cannot unplug my computer. It's a
Why
little
do
bit
you apologize? No, this is terrific.
it's a little bit messy behind me, but
Oh,
Yeah.
it is what it is.
we've been in the same 700 square feet for the last
Honey, it's only 500.
500 square feet last month. So we know all about the piles that just inextricably form. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me where you are and how you are.
We are in Brooklyn, New York. We're in central Brooklyn, in the Western Crown Heights neighborhood.
And yeah.
And we're good today.
We're good today. Yeah. I don't know. We've been quarantined since I think March 14th, or been under social distance
March
quarantine.
16th, yeah.
March 16th, I think, was the first day. So we're in,
and it's Monday. So
it's Monday. So we're
exactly 10 weeks.
10 weeks. Yeah, 10 weeks that we've been in the apartment. It's the city, like for a while it was really locked down for about 2 months there. It's people are emerging a little bit, like there's more to-go places are opening back up and that sort of thing as people get a handle. But yeah, it's been
restaurants are adapting. It's an artist city, and so we feel like people are gonna get creative. People are getting creative, and there's a ton of people out in the parks. It's almost hard to social distance if you're like running or bicycling.
Yeah, there's definitely bottleneck areas that you figure out how to avoid.
But
so how are you expressing your, like, are you writing stuff? Like, how are you creating right now? Like, how you keep it active?
Well, I mean, this has been the big kind of conundrum as theater artists in the pandemic, in that, like, we were planning on opening a show in New York on March 18th, basically, and we ended up canceling that one about a week before the city, week before Broadway like shuttered its doors entirely. And so it's been kind of this big existential question as theater artists when we find ourselves in this situation where our bread and butter is amassing crowds and gathering groups of people together, and when that becomes a dangerous thing to do, and it has to be put on pause for an indeterminate amount of time, it has been kind of a question of like, how do we express our art form? And quite honestly, I mean, at least for me personally, like, I've kind of been retreating into other interests a little bit. I've taken up I used to do a lot of video work and a lot of film work, and I used to really enjoy video editing. So I've kind of gone back to that a little bit and just got kind of reconnected with that. So I guess like I express and writing a little bit, I guess, but mainly been kind of expressing myself in ways that are outside of my natural wheelhouse.
I'm looking forward to seeing like what people come up with, people like you come up with to kind of help us deal with these things. Like,
yeah, definitely. It's yeah, because I mean, that's something I've learned very quickly with this, is that even without necessarily an audience to do it for, like, the drive to create still exists. And this is something we talked about with our friends, the friends on the Fringe circuit. Is it will be very interesting when the festivals come back, because like what you're saying is like this thing is going to permeate every single aspect of life and art. And it'll be very interesting when the theater comes back and, 75% of the shows are all pandemic focused.
No,
it's being like slight hyperbole. But
I know. I think that's what's so interesting is that there's the conversation we instead of being able to be social with each other, we're finding ourselves more on social media, and like even more at a time, I think, when it had sort of plateaued, when we felt like it would be nice to just like treat this like a business, because actually I would like less social media in my life. And so now it's interesting because we need it for promotion, we need it for connection, we need it for to know the news where our friends and family and our communities are, because our communities are elsewhere, and our communities are experiencing the pandemic in completely different ways. And so I mean, my artistic process, for me, this is hibernation. You know what I mean? This is like the learning time. This is, what is everybody talking about? Are people talking about the problems? Are people talking about the solutions? What is everybody tired of talking about? I think everybody is tired of talking about how we're like in a pandemic, but it is the reality. And so I think as artists, now it's interesting to think about, okay, what is the ultimate escape? If art and entertainment are the way through this, and we're all looking for an escape from the current reality, what does that mean? Does it mean looking at a screen? Because looking at a screen feels so much like not my reality. I mean, right now I'm talking to a mirror. I'm looking at you, Benoit, but I'm essentially getting this like mirror, and there is such displacement, a feeling of displacement that comes with that, even if you are isolated in the same spot. And so that is a strange phenomenon of the moment that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what, for one, you guys come up with, whether it's diametrically opposed to that or it was born out of that. I think it's going to be just interesting to see what.
Yeah, it's going to influence everything. And like we have one of the things that we've talked about that we like looking forward to a point when the theaters come back. Like we have one long-term project that we want to develop while we have this luxury of time, which was something we rarely had as a gigging touring theater company. You're always on the road, you're always doing your past work. It's hard to find 6 weeks to create a new show, much less like a year or a year and a half. So we're gonna kind of take that, lean into that a little bit, and just take a lot of a fair amount of time with the next piece.
Cool. So talk to me, because of course we're talking to each other right now, partly because it's a cool thing to do, and partly because we're broadcasting the legend of White Woman Creek.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit how that show was born, and how, in what circumstances it came about.
Well, that is, it was made right here in our 12 by 10 foot living room. So the fact that we made it right here in a different living room arrangement 8 years ago is significant to me, because we've lived in New York for 10 years now. That piece is definitely reflective of our upbringing. It's a ghost story from Western Kansas, where my father's family comes from, and I've been thinking about that a lot today, just because all of our different influences, and especially like how when we made the show, we basically put ourselves in isolation here in our apartment, except we would go out and work at our restaurant jobs, and then in every spare moment we would come back and we would just do like tons of research and tons of practicing and tons of brainstorming, and we would
and tons of arguing too.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of how our process is.
Yeah.
Like all our pieces we create together. Like we've never done a piece where like I've written a piece and handed it off to Katie that she's performed, or vice versa.
It's very much a conversation.
Yeah. So like, and the term we use for that is like a devised ensemble. Even though there's just two of us, it's a very small ensemble, but still an ensemble. And one of the interesting things I think about that type of work, where it's, you know, you're putting your heads together and you're arguing about things and you're hashing things out and you're fighting for the things you're passionate about and you're allowing the things that your partner is passionate about to rise to the top, is that like the work tends to, and this is similar whether it's been a 2-person devised ensemble or like a larger like 8-person devised ensemble, is that because it's not directed by one single person, like, and you're tapping into kind of that flexibility and that kind of like serendipity of that comes with collaboration, you kind of start to tap into things that, like societal things and things that are kind of bubbling under the surface of society. We've noticed this with a lot of shows that will, especially the ensemble devised shows, is that we'll create them and then they won't make sense for like 3 or 4 years. Like we'll look back in retrospect and realize like, oh, this was bubbling under the surface of society, and then it broke like 3 years later, and because kind of derived from the unconscious through the act of collaboration, it ends up being very prescient in some ways. And we definitely had that experience with Legend of White Woman Creek. We created it in 2012, and it's a piece that like deals very much with American expansionism and manifest destiny and racism and
rugged individualism.
And women's rights in oppressive societies. And it's been interesting to tour that one we've toured it for 7 years now, and it continually becomes more and more relevant in many ways, it seems, or not to say it's more relevant, but it different aspects are like kind of heightened and brought out as society kind of makes its we had toured that show all last summer, but we hadn't really performed it a lot for about 4 years before that. We toured it in 2013 and 2014, and then not really again until 2019.
It's a painful show.
It's very painful. It is
a hard one. It almost, in a way, it almost gets like harder to do.
Yeah, and like we had forgotten after the 2014 tour. You know, it took about 5 years to forget, but in the middle of the 2019 tour, after, you know, we'd done 40 performances of this very, very somber folk opera back to back, we were reminded of like, oh yeah, sitting in this constant state of sorrow is very, very exhausting. Like just and more so for Katie, because she's summing these emotions and I'm running tech. And though I sometimes get emotional during tech, not these times. No, yeah, it's very interesting. After touring it for so long, we realized, oh yeah, this is a tough one to tour. But it is a nice piece in that it's, and we've had people say this to us, the emotional release aspect of it, it's a tearjerker. Yeah.
Benoit, that's such a gift to any artist to be able to come in and play music in your incredible space, because the acoustics are just magic.
Beautiful.
And to have access to all that equipment, and what a resource to have the filmed version and the high quality sound and recording, like just from a marketing standpoint, which is so much of what we have to do outside of the actual art of it, it's invaluable.
So if you're working on something right now, an open invitation, like the winter time is the right time for New Yorkers to come down to Florida. So at some point, if you want to come down and block a week, we can do that. And then we can, I can try to work with local colleges and stuff and bring in small groups maybe, or at least disseminate the clinics or workshops digitally with them and that kind of stuff. Like we're going to try and partner with the local colleges and stuff.
Wow, thank
amazing.
you, Benoit.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can work something out.
Jump at the chance.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, anything else you'd like to tell us?
I don't.
I mean,
I'm not sure. Yeah. Other than
we can talk about the show. Let's see. We talked about the show.
talked about the show. Yeah.
Did we talk about the show enough? Do we talk about the show enough, Benoit?
Well, I'm interested in the fact that you chose. I'm intrigued by the fact that you chose to make it like basically a song cycle. I mean, it's more than a song cycle, but it's heavily like dependent on the musical performances. And I'm wondering why you went that route. Like this could have been like a standing, talking thing from beginning to end. Like, how did you come to choose to make it a musically based, show? That was when we were in the apartment arguing about what the show should be. Like that was the biggest. Oftentimes when we're in the collaboration and it's not going well, we'll say we're in the desert of like we're just wandering around. We're just wandering. We're not getting anywhere. And we did that for a while. Mainly just figuring out like you make the decision. We're going to do a one-woman show. It's going to be about this. Those are two big decisions to make, but it really doesn't answer any of your questions about how you're going to tell a story with one person. And so that was the big question that we grappled with throughout, I'd say 2/3 of the process was trying to figure out this. And it was much like there was a version of it where it was like a multi-character piece, maybe some masks,
but still
maybe
a solo performance.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think we just knocked out all of the ideas that we were like, no, that is not the that's not the show.
Yep.
That's the show that we've like seen before that we didn't like, and so
yeah.
so I think it was born out of necessity. It was like I take the skills that I have and the skills that Nick has, and this story that I was passionate about telling, and our desire to our desire to basically delve into history and question the ghost stories that are still present. The fact that ghost stories are very much our legacy, and they're intrinsic to the values that a community has.
They're folk tales and they're there for a reason.
Exactly.
There's a
so,
reason
like, why did my grandmother tell me this story? Why is it still being told, and what does that say about the storyteller? And I think once we knew what story we were telling, we just knew.
Well, that kind of, we knew we were telling a story that was going to be in 1850s United States, 1840s,
late 1860s.
1860s. I was going to say 60s first. I was like,
Okay.
no, that's wrong. Sorry, we created the show 7 years ago. All that research has been
And
pushed
he's been editing.
Let me finish my point. You don't
You're
need to defend me. No one cares that I didn't know the year. But the folk music aspect, because it was a show set in the 1860s, we're like, this is gonna probably be folk music is going to be the driving force. So that got us just researching a lot of old, just folk Americana. Started listening to a lot of Woody Guthrie, a lot of Dylan, a lot of Lead Belly, a lot of Odetta, and I think there was one point where I was watching a Bob Dylan documentary, and there was some footage of Odetta Cafe Wah, and it was just like this grainy black and white footage, and it was just that image of her in the spotlight with a single instrument hung from the back of the room, and you could just see the dust in the air, and she just had this 75-yard stare where she sang, and the song she was singing, she was just howling. She sang, and you just saw in her eyes that she knew the truth. Like, I don't know what that truth is, but I can see in her eyes that she knows. And it occurred to me, and this was at like 4:30 in the morning. It occurred to me, I was like, that's it. Odetta knows the truth, and the ghost knows the truth. So I quickly went over to the room, woke Katie up, and said, Katie, I've got the idea. At the beginning of the show, you summon a ghost, and then the ghost possesses you, and it picks up a guitar, and it sings its tales. And Katie says, yeah, ghost lounge singer, sounds great, and went back to bed. And
very effective. It works very well. And
yeah, I pitched it to her the next day, and it went much better. That's another thing with the collaboration is you gotta like timing is everything with pitching to your collaborators. But that was the big turning point. And then we realized, like, okay, here's what the staging is. It's a folk concert. Now we got to write 10 folk songs.
Well, and it gave us a history lesson into our own history as Americans, and what our heritage is, and what I don't know, I had never really given serious thought to folk songs before. And just like ghost stories, they give us truths. And throughout human history, whether it's theater, whether it's music, you know, that there's power in that live performance. And in that instance, it was captured on film. But just this idea of being able to take a tune that we all know, and then to be able to give it a new story that is relevant to us, that we can carry forward. The churches around us today played My Country 'Tis of Thee today, and I was thinking about this and how My Country 'Tis of Thee, before Samuel Smith wrote those lyrics, he's only responsible for the lyrics, and that's what makes them important to Americans. Land where my fathers died, land of the Pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. And before that, it's God Save the King. You know, it's coming from that song, which is, and so all of these songs are ours, but we can take ownership of them with new lyrics, and essentially that's what we were doing with this.
And that was a huge turning point too in the process. It was another aha moment of after we decided to go the heavy folk song route. Then it became like, well, what are we going to write? And how are we also we're grappling with, we're making our first piece of horror theater too. And how do you make something scary on stage? We didn't know at that time. We're still figuring it out as well. But what we tried to do with the piece was evoke this sense of sitting around a campfire. And the huge turning point musically was when Katie called me up and left me a voice message. And she was like, listen to this. And she just started playing
Home on the Range. Which we're all taught. I grew up in Kansas, and so it's the Kansas State song. Yep. We all know the song. We all know the lyrics. We sing it every year on Kansas Day. and so if you. Yeah.
But she had tuned it down into a minor key, and so it became much more long. And I'm not a very good vocalist, but so it became like, oh, give me a home where the buffaloes roam, and like sounded familiar, but also sounded strange, which became so unsettling. And so we really mined that aspect of folk music. Like the few, because about half the songs are old folk songs that we've repurposed. And oftentimes we would tune them down a little bit into a more minor register.
Don't give away all our secrets.
Like the Kansas Suitor is the Yellow Rose of Texas, just in a minor key, basically.
Well, the show is fantastic. So you guys, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I hope you come back. And stay safe, of course, and keep creating. We can't wait to see you again.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
You too. Be well.
Yeah.
So much, guys.
Thank you, Benoit.
Bye, Benoit. Thank you.
See you later.